Hello YouTube, today I want to talk about One Piece and specifically chapter 1186, One More Time. Now I want to talk about the stuff that I think will be important coming along the line. One thing that is overall important, these are just notes on my phone, that will be overall important to the rest of the story as a whole, as well as looking back at things that we have seen, as well as one thing that will presumably be answered in the chapters to come, especially with how relevant it is to the story it seems. Right off the bat, the very important thing to be looking at, I believe, comes from Emu's line, "Thou might not know what is happening to thee, but history repeats regardless," as said to Loki. Now, this line can have a lot of meanings. If you look at it in immediate context, this just goes off of what he was talking to Loki about previously, saying how that 800 years ago, the people of Elbaf made a sacrifice to save their children, which we are seeing now repeats itself exactly. The people of Elbaf are sacrificing themselves to save their children. But now if you take this line in context of Loki and Luffy, it has a bit more meaning as in context of like the leaks, they kind of use a more literal or exact translation as they'll put it. So instead of saying I think it's like 1183, 82 when the fighting kind of starts between Loki and Emu while Luffy is eating, he says Needhog and Joy Boy, while in the official, Viz Media, it is Luffy and Loki. So it almost seems as though he is referring to who they are, who they kind of represent, instead of who they are now as the actual people. So if you're looking at the context of history repeating itself regardless, in that context, he's more so referring to things like the ancient god, the ancient warrior god of Elbaf, who originally had Needhog, who was actually an opponent of the sun god Nika when it was Joy Boy, and they would fight each other and they'd have this kind of conflict. But it was actually unknown if that was truly an enemy thing or if it was just we're the two of the most powerful people, so let's kind of quarrel and have our bits and bouts, kind of like a Roger and Whitebeard type of situation. So it almost could be something like that where there is always a Whitebeard in time, just this extremely powerful person who is a rival to our Joy Boy, but not in the sense of, the way that Davy Jones or Roxy Zebek or now Blackbeard is. So it would be something referring to that. Of course, compared to back then, history has changed, as back then, the warrior god was an enemy to the sun god and was also part of Emu's team. Whether or not he was corrupted, I can't remember actually. But then we're seeing now that Loki, who could be kind of referred to as the New Age warrior god, as he also has Ragnir and the Dragon Fruit model Needhog. So he's kind of seen as the new one, and he is he's an antagonist, or he's against Emu and is with Luffy, or maybe not with Luffy, but because he is against Emu, he is partnering with the New Age sun god Nika. So it's kind of interesting to see how there's a slight change in history in that. And if you take that line and you just take it as context for us, the readers, instead of to the people in the story, it is referring to Shuri and King Harold and the shallow contracts as a whole. As we've seen Princess Shuri's backstory kind of play out through the past few chapters, we get to see a lot of similarities between her story and King Harold's story, as both of them have a parent who takes the contract believing it would be a betterment for their country, at least presumably that's what Shuri's dad was doing. It is unknown exactly why he took the contract, but he did, as we get to see that he was in a demonic form when he was killed, although it's unknown if he took a contract or maybe there was just the reverse domain thing, I can't remember what it's called, but the thing that causes people to become corrupt that Emu does, as Emu is in the room when it's present. But presumably he took the contract similarly that Harold did, and then after a while we get down to their kids who have to take out their parents. Of course, history changes there as Shuri's story takes place first, and she ends up taking the contract. Loki doesn't need the contract as he is just strong enough taking the Needhog fruit and using Ragnir to defeat his father, King Harold. And in both stories, there's also an important character to both of their, related characters, one being Brook, one being Jarl, who take a sword to the head in the same place and miraculously survive, though through slightly different methods. So it's kind of interesting to see how, even though, yes, history repeats itself, there's always that slight difference. We even see history repeating itself as early back as our whole, Alabasta versus Dressrosa arcs, which if you don't know the whole mirroring thing on that, then look it up. I'm sure there's a lot better videos than what I could try to explain in like a 30-second synopsis, but basically warlord who wants to take over the kingdom, one fails, one succeeds, blah 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 blah. There's a whole, thing about this. You guys can check it out yourself. But there's also a very interesting note to go with Shanks with this whole, history repeating itself. Because when Shanks first meets King Harold and, they're at Marijois, Shanks pretends to be all like, I've been living in squalor my whole life. You're just a common giant from the bottom world. I live up here. I'm a celestial dragon. Blah. But of course, he's lying. He's only pretending to be like this because he's in the presence of Emu, because they're on Marijois, and you can't be on Marijois and say something without Emu saying it if you have a shallow contract, the way that Harold and Shanks did. But once they're further enough away from Marijois, they can actually start talking more freely. Shanks even saying like, hey, by the way, I am the captain of the Red Hair Pirates. So an interesting thing with Princess Shuri is she does something similar with Brooke, where she's saying like, my whole life, like for the last 16 years, I could have been living it up as a celestial dragon, but I've been down here. Those weren't my parents. That type of thing. And it's interesting because she's saying it to Brooke, who we see now in the present that she was still having some type of connection to him, still having some type of feelings for him. So potentially at that time, whether fully still in control of herself or not, she was able to get a message out to be like, hey, you need to know we need to distance ourselves, and she was still in control enough not to kill him by putting it, lower or anything like that, but to hit an area with her small enough sword, as it wasn't like some big cleaving sword, that it wouldn't actually kill him or cause any serious damage, as mentioned by the medics. The last thing of note, which will presumably kind of come up more recently, is to do with the eyes. The eyes of Princess Shuri, or Saint Manmayer Gonko. I'll probably more so be referring to her as Shuri, but it is important to know that she is also known as Saint Manmayer Gonko, just because the man who we get to see in the chapter is Saint Manmayer Guro, or Guru, I don't know how his name is going to be pronounced yet, my apologies for that, but he is presumably the father, or at least related in some way, because he also has the same heterochromia eyes, and he says a very important line about them, as such. But her bipolar eyes are an extremely rare trait, and the Great One desires her. While it may not have awakened for me, perhaps she can, before being interrupted by Emu, who is still present in the room. Now, what exactly can this mean, and what awakening of the eyes could be so important that even Emu wants them? Well, right off the bat, my first thought would be something similar to the awakening of the Three-Eye Tribe, their awakening, which is allowing them to have the voice of all things, the ability to read poneglyphs, as well as we've seen, speak and hear Zunisha. Although not everyone can actually speak and give commands to Zunisha, but you are able to hear what he's saying and understand what he's doing, and then, the whole reading the poneglyph stuff. So could this be something that Emu needs? Emu isn't able to read the poneglyphs, and in order to find Laugh-Tale, the last island where presumably something from Joy Boy is present at, then, Emu will need to know the word poneglyphs to be able to get there, or perhaps to be able to read an inscription there that could be leading to something, or maybe even the straw hat in the chest we saw from however long ago needs something to do with the voice of all things, or some ability to read an unknown language that perhaps awakening these eyes can do, or it could be something to do with perhaps clairvoyance, as it is stated by Brooke while he is training Princess Shuri that she is seemingly having the ability to see into the future, which we know is advanced observation Haki. So what if, similar to the Needhog fruit in depending on your size is depending on its strength, so a human gets the minimal strength, a giant gets a good bit of the strength from the Needhog fruit, but the ancient giant can draw out all of its power. So perhaps that's something with observation Haki. A normal human has a 8-second, can see up to 10 seconds ahead with future sight. A person with the awakened, or even just a regular Three-Eye Tribe member, can see further into the future, even having slight clairvoyance or prophetic visions. And perhaps somebody who has whatever the eyes that Shuri and the Saint Manmayer family seems to have has the ability to see a full view of the future to an unknown degree, or perhaps even just having supervision. And I'm talking about something like you can see everything that is happening on the planet at once. Think about like getting a super monkey and dropping it on like Bloons Tower Defense 3. Yeah, upgrade that range all the way and it sees the entire map. So, could it be something with that? Who knows, but we'll find out in the couple of chapters to come. So stay tuned if you want to hear more, and if you want to hear me break down the chapters, then stick around, and the best way to know when I do that is by subscribing. And if you like the video, then go ahead and like and comment down below what you like so I can continue doing it, so you can continue coming back and enjoying it. And if you didn't like the video, then that's alright. Go ahead and dislike it, but don't forget to comment below what you didn't like so that I can improve upon it, so if you ever see me again, then next time you can enjoy me a bit more. But until then, bye guys.